It's useful to understand the world by looking at roads. Where they are, where they aren't, who built them, who maintains them. Roads enable movement from one place to the rest of the world. They create opportunity. Roads connect us. Much of what we do as coffee buyers is spend hours on the road, in a truck or on foot, or on the back of a motorbike. The places we go are often inaccessible and isolated because of weather and time and erosion, or a lack of government support, or just difficult terrain. So our job becomes to build roads between buyers and producers, especially where those roads don't currently exist. Crop to Cup has been buying from the Layo Teraga Cooperative since 2022. Layo is one of the few cooperatives in Ethiopia to break away from its union and obtain its own export license. This means that we can work with and buy directly from the cooperative. Layo buys cherry from its 1,900 registered members at 3 sites in Teraga, paying upfront for the cherry, but also a second dividend payment at export. Last year business was good, and co-op members received a second payment of 6 birr per kg of cherry, 3 times the average.
This is our grade 1. How has the year been for you, for business?
Well, it's very good.
Yeah?
It's good.
Cooperatives like Layo Teraga use their profits to invest in the community for projects that benefit members and the common good. This means building schools and bringing electricity to town, and building roads. This year, we're focusing on what Layo does best: high quality, traditionally washed coffees and naturals. They're separating the harvest into 2-week segments, enabling us to pick the best lots and ship early.
Ah.
Okay, never mind.
Crop to Cup had bought coffee from one of Tagel Alemayehu's sites in the past, but this year we heard he was going to process washed coffees in Hambella. We visited last year, and we were in awe of this station at the top of the mountain in Goro, above 2,300 meters. The roads here end at the station, as if everything leads to there. Tagel's father was one of the biggest suppliers in the Bulehora area, and was the first one to have a dry mill. When the market turned, he went bankrupt. Tagel worked as a cherry collector and an accountant for other export companies, and eventually saved enough to buy the dry mill and washing station back from the bank. He then came back to Hambella and started this station. Tagel's a careful businessman. Last year, when cherry prices were high and finance was short, they didn't process any washed coffees. This year, they are.
Yeah, you won.
I'm Tagel Alemayehu. I'm brother of Tagel Alemayehu. So I'm working here in Hamballa station. With you, we are going to make good coffee for you. Perfect.
Before the harvest, the National Bank of Ethiopia changed its monetary policy and floated the birr, leading to a rapid devaluation of the local currency. This came after Ethiopia accepted a new loan from the International Monetary Fund meant to reform the economy following the government's default in December 2023. The loan's stipulations included the removal of subsidies for fuel, privatization of state-owned assets and utilities, currency devaluation, and inviting foreign banks to operate in Ethiopia. The hope of these reforms was to stabilize the imbalance between Ethiopia's exports, like coffee, and its imports. But as a consequence, costs rose. The cost of fuel, cost of services, the cost of cherry, and with these new regulations in place, bank financing was difficult to obtain for all but the largest exporters and suppliers. Financing rates rose from an average of 12 to 18%, and under the new policies, often required collateral. For many coffee producers, banks simply refused to service loans. Where they did, loans were based on previous loans, without accounting for speculative growth or the devaluation of the birr.
The wedding, no? The wedding day. Wow.
Tariku Kare was born and raised in Bombay. At 15, he started working for the local cooperative, sorting cherry. He got promoted to work the washing channels and eventually got hired to manage a washing station in Nansebo. When its owner went bankrupt, Tariku and 17 other workers formed a company and took it over. Eventually, he saved enough, built his reputation, came back home to Bombay, and started a washing station here. Before the Cup of Excellence and before big exporters started dotting the area with washing stations, Tariku was here, right off the road, the first washing station in Bombay. Cherry prices were high during our visit, an average of 105 birr per kg. But for crop to cup, Tariku only buys from farmers who do selective picking, paying a higher price of 120 birr, plus a second payment at export of 4 birr. At this elevation, it was early in the harvest. The first coffee off the beds was still conditioning in the warehouse. Regardless, we drew a sample to understand this year's quality. In Ethiopia, most coffee is grown by smallholders on less than 2 hectares of land. Those who have 2 hectares or more, though, can obtain their own export license under the government's 2017 proclamation liberalizing the export market. And so Tomas Genemo, who grows coffee on 8 hectares on the border of Shantawane and Bombay, got his export license. We met Tomas during our first visit to Bensa in 2019. That visit, we connected with other producers we'd go on to buy from, like Basha Bekele, Nukuse Nare, Bekele Balacho, and Bekele Kachara. But we didn't buy Tomas's coffee, and he never used his export license. This year, he invited us back to see his farm and drying station. Tomas is unusual. While even small exporters in Ethiopia typically don't live at their stations or on their farms, Tomas does, operating more like a small estate in Colombia than an exporter in Ethiopia. While other smallholder farmers build their stations further up the mountain and further away from main roads, chasing quality and trying to break away from the competition of other cherry collectors, Tomas lives here, next to his farm, near a main road, drying the coffee that he and his 4 brothers grow. He saw the processing changes we'd asked for elsewhere, such as drying under shade and separating lots by harvest timing, and made those changes at his own station without anyone asking. This year, Tomas is exporting his coffee for the first time to Cup to Cup. Every Tuesday through the harvest, the minimum price set by the government crept up as the commodity market did. It's one of those uncomfortable truths of working as a coffee buyer. Sudden high prices tend to be detrimental for quality, even if they're good for producers, at least in the short term. In a race to capitalize on high prices, standards for cherry sorting, processing, and drying are relaxed. Our program for this year included a requirement for lot separation from producers' warehouses all the way through to final milling. By evaluating each lot separately, we could isolate the highest quality lots and both increase the price we're able to pay, but also our ability to sell those coffees, leading to larger bookings with individual producers. But in order to have confidence in these coffees, we first needed to ensure the integrity of the lots. This meant spending as much time in warehouses, labeling bags and drawing samples, as it did on the road. When lot separation is done in Ethiopia, it's traditionally by the area in which cherry was collected. Cherry collectors and processors generally regard all coffee coming from one cabele and elevation as the same, regardless of whose garden it was picked from or the week or the month of the harvest. Coffee might rest in a pile or jute bags in a warehouse. And because it's all understood to be the same, samples are often drawn from one part of the pile or one jute bag, rather than representing the entire lot. This can lead to rejections when buyers find samples don't match. Over time, those rejections can lead to an erosion of trust. But we hoped, with the training we'd provided before and during the harvest, this could be prevented. For many buyers, single producer washed coffee from Ethiopia remains the holy grail. Washing stations in the south are traditionally massive, requiring dozens or hundreds of hectares and millions of birr. For this reason, the only way to buy washed coffee here was through large exporters or cooperatives, collecting cherry from hundreds or thousands of producers. Even when traceability wasn't an issue, financial transparency could be. So, in 2023, Crop to Cup began a project to fund the creation of micromills in Ethiopia. In its first year, we provided pulpers for just 3 producers in Bensa, 2 of whom would become Cup of Excellence winners later that season. This year, we expanded the program to include 2 others in Bensa and 1 in Chilchele. As a result, these producers were able to access new buyers and new markets. Most coffee growers in Ethiopia sell their cherry as fresh cherry to suppliers or exporters. During our visit, the local price for cherry was high, higher than it's ever been in our decade working here. In Bensa, cherry prices reached 125 birr per kg. In Worka, 75. Even in a good year like this one, when prices are high, That amounts to just $1.50 or $2 per pound as exportable green. But if they can export their coffee, producers stand to make 2 or 3 times more for the same harvest. When we began this work, many producers were skeptical, having been burned in the past by buyers who demanded more work only to reject the coffee before export. But this year, when we returned to visit smallholders who sold their first export to us the previous harvest, their neighbors came along, hoping to connect with us and get a better price for their harvest too. One of the producers who exported for the first time last year is Shibru Dube. We met Shibru through his son, Kefyalu, who's a teacher when he's not helping his father during the harvest. Last year, they produced a dry processed coffee for crop to cup, using coffee they grew at their farm in Chelchele, where they grow Kurume and Dega coffee under the canopy of old-growth trees at over 2,100 meters. In the past, they'd sold coffee to local suppliers, but with the premiums from crop to cup, were able to expand their drying area, which was growing overcrowded with high production this year. This year, they're producing a white honey process for the first time, using the pulper provided by crop to cup. Roads lead to other roads in much the same way that connections beget other connections. 2 years ago, on our way back from visiting Layo Teraga, we pulled off the road in Adado. We'd been given the contact of a smallholder from another coffee producer and stopped on our way back to Dilla. Back then, Fikadu Lege had been growing coffee for only 3 years, supplying dried cherry to the Yirgacheffe Union. Dried, rather than fresh, to get the best price. He'd gotten his export license the year before, but didn't have access to buyers.
It looks good.
Before coffee, he bought bread from Dilla and brought it back to Adado to sell locally. He started growing and drying coffee as a way to make a better life for himself, his wife, and their 10 children. This year, with the feedback we provided him last year, his first export, he's preparing a lot to submit to Cup of Excellence for the first time. We returned to Addis after collecting more than 125 samples from more than 24 producers in southern Ethiopia. While the work in the field was done, our work as buyers was really just beginning. Over the next 3 days, we milled, graded, measured, roasted, and cupped each of them, delivering feedback or contracts to their producers. And then it was time for us to go, hit the road again, back home, to tell the stories we'd learned and talk about the people we'd met. I'm Asegenalu, Ethiopia. See you soon.
I love you. Crop. 2 cups.